I sold my house to pay for my son's wedding. 3 months ago, that same son drove me to a place called Maple Ridge Senior Living, walked me up to the front desk, and told the woman there that I'd be more comfortable here. He hugged me for exactly 4 seconds, said he'd call me on Sundays, and left before I could even find my room number. I want to tell you what happened in the 30 years before that day, because for a long time, I thought I was building a family. It turns out I was just funding one. My name is Robert. I'm 78 years old, and I spent 41 years working at a machine parts factory outside Cleveland, the kind of job where you clock in before the sun comes up and your hands never stop smelling like metal, no matter how many times you wash them. I met my wife, Carol, at a church picnic when I was 23. We got married 11 months later, and 2 years after that, our son Michael was born. Carol used to say that the day Michael was born was the only day in my life she ever saw me cry, and she wasn't wrong. I held that boy in the hospital hallway because they wouldn't let me into the room yet, and I remember thinking that nothing bad would ever be allowed to happen to him, not while I was alive to stop it. We didn't have much money when Michael was young. Carol clipped coupons and made his clothes last 2 sizes longer than they should have. I picked up every overtime shift the factory would give me, and some weekends I drove a delivery truck on the side just so we could put a little away for his education. There were Christmases where Michael got exactly one gift, wrapped carefully so it looked like more, and he never knew, because Carol and I made sure he never had to know. We wanted him to grow up believing the world was a soft place, even when it wasn't soft to us. When Michael turned 16, he wanted to go to a private tutoring program to help him get into a good engineering school. It cost more than I made in 2 months. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Carol after he went to bed, going through the numbers 3 times, trying to find a version where it worked. It didn't work. So I took a second mortgage on the house without telling him, and told him instead that I'd found some extra money at work. He got into a strong university 4 years later, partly because of that tutoring, and I never once regretted the lie, because I saw the way his face lit up when the acceptance letter came. That look on his face was worth more to me than the debt. College wasn't cheap either. I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is the only thing I have left that nobody can take from me. I did not have the money for Michael's tuition, not even close. I remortgaged the house again. I sold Carol's car, the one she loved, the little blue one, and told her we'd get her a new one once things settled down. Things never really settled down, but she never once complained. She used to ride the bus to her part-time job at the pharmacy, 40 minutes each way, and she'd come home smiling like it was nothing, because in her mind, it was nothing, compared to what her son was becoming. Michael graduated with an engineering degree and a job offer in Chicago, and Carol and I sat in the 4th row at his graduation, crying like a couple of fools, prouder than we had ever been of anything in our whole lives. I remember one summer when Michael was about 10, he asked if we could go to a lake house for a week like his friend Danny's family did every August. We couldn't afford it, not even close, but I didn't want him to grow up feeling like the boy whose family never went anywhere. So I told him we were going camping instead, made it sound like an adventure, like something better than a lake house. I borrowed a tent from a man at the factory, and Carol packed sandwiches for 4 days straight, and we drove 2 hours to a state park and pitched that tent by a little pond that was really more of a large puddle with some fish in it. Michael didn't know the difference. He caught a sunfish with a stick and a piece of string and thought he'd conquered the wilderness. Carol and I lay awake that first night listening to him breathe in his little sleeping bag between us, and I remember thinking that this exact moment, was what all the overtime shifts were for. Not the money. There was another year, when Michael was about 13, when I taught him to drive in the church parking lot on Sunday afternoons, both of us tense, me gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles went white every time he came near a light pole. He was terrible at it for months, and I never once raised my voice, because I remembered my own father raising his voice at me in a similar parking lot years before, and I'd promised myself I would never make my son feel small the way I'd felt small. By the time he took his driving test, he drove smoother than I did. I sat in the waiting room of the DMV prouder than a man has any right to be over a piece of laminated plastic, and when he walked out holding that license, I hugged him so hard he laughed and told me to let go. People were staring. I didn't care who was staring. I was proud of every single thing that boy did, right up until the day he stopped needing me to be. Carol passed away 6 years later. Heart failure, sudden, the kind of thing the doctors say they can't always predict. Michael flew in for the funeral, stayed 4 days, and flew back to Chicago, where he was building his career and, by then, dating a woman named Jennifer. I understood. He had a life. I told myself that every single day for the next 2 years, sitting alone in a house that had gotten too quiet, too big, too full of Carol's handwriting on old grocery lists I couldn't bring myself to throw away. When Michael told me he was getting married, I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since Carol died. He asked me to help with the wedding costs, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The wedding Jennifer wanted was the kind you see in magazines, the kind with a live band and a photographer who follows you around for 12 hours and flowers flown in from somewhere warm. It cost more than I had. So I did what I'd always done when it came to Michael. I sold the house. Not remortgaged this time. Sold it outright, the house where he took his first steps, where Carol taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, where I taught him to shave standing in front of the bathroom mirror the summer he turned 14. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town and told everyone it was because the old house had gotten too much to manage alone. Michael thanked me at the wedding, in front of 200 guests, called me the most generous father a man could ask for, and for a few months after that, I believed things between us had never been better. The apartment was lonely, but I told myself loneliness was a fair trade for having given my son the wedding he wanted. I visited Chicago twice that first year. Jennifer was polite in the way people are polite to someone they're waiting to stop being responsible for. She'd smile, offer me coffee, and find a reason to leave the room within 10 minutes. Michael was busy, always taking a call in the other room, and I told myself that was just what successful men in their 30s looked like. I told myself a lot of things during those years that I now understand were simply what a lonely father tells himself so he doesn't have to feel the cold coming in. The calls got shorter first. Where they used to last 20, 30 minutes, they shrank down to 5, then 3, then a text message instead of a call, something like, "Busy week, talk soon Dad." Then the visit stopped altogether. I'd call and get Jennifer instead, who would tell me Michael was in a meeting, or traveling, or exhausted from work, always some reason that sounded reasonable on its own, but which, stacked one on top of another over 2 years, started to look like something else entirely. I didn't want to see what it looked like. A father doesn't want to see that. So I kept calling, kept leaving cheerful voicemails, kept sending birthday cards with a little money folded inside, the same way I had when he was in college, because some habits from love don't know how to stop, even after the love stops being returned. 2 years ago, my health started to slip. Nothing dramatic at first, just my knees getting worse, my balance not being what it used to be, a fall in the kitchen that left a bruise on my hip the size of a dinner plate. I called Michael and told him, not to worry him, just because he was my son and I thought a son should know these things about his father. He came to visit exactly once after that call, stayed one night, and spent most of it on his phone in the guest room. Before he left, he mentioned, almost casually, that he and Jennifer had been looking into some options for me, somewhere I could get help if I needed it. I remember nodding along at the kitchen table, not understanding yet that he wasn't asking my opinion. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made. 3 months ago, he showed up on a Tuesday morning with a rented van and 4 cardboard boxes, and told me it was time. Not unkindly. He wasn't cruel about it, and I think that's almost the hardest part to explain to people, that he wasn't cruel, he was simply finished. He packed up 30 years of my life into 4 boxes, most of which were photographs and Carol's old sewing kit and a few of my books, because he said the apartment at Maple Ridge was cozy, and I wouldn't have room for everything anyway. I sat in the passenger seat of that rented van and watched my neighborhood disappear behind us, and Michael talked the whole drive about a project at his job, like this was any other Tuesday, like he wasn't delivering his father to the last address he'd ever have. At the front desk, he told the woman I'd be more comfortable here, the same way you'd describe a couch or a mattress, something that simply needed the right environment. He hugged me, and I felt how quick it was, how his hand was already reaching for his car keys before his arms had even fully left my shoulders. He said he'd call on Sundays. That was 3 months ago. He has called 4 times since then, twice by accident, I think, because both times he sounded surprised I picked up and got off the phone within 90 seconds. There's a woman here at Maple Ridge named Dorothy, 2 doors down from my room. She's 84, sharp as anything, and she used to be a schoolteacher for 35 years in a small town in Ohio not far from where I grew up. We eat dinner together most nights now, an unspoken arrangement that started the first week I arrived, when she saw me sitting alone at a table for 4 and simply sat down across from me without asking, the way some people just know when someone needs company more than they need to be asked if they want it. Dorothy has 3 children. One lives 40 minutes away and hasn't visited in 8 months. The other 2 she says she doesn't like to talk about, and I've learned not to ask further, because some silences are answers on their own. She told me once, over a plate of overcooked chicken and green beans, that she spent her whole career pouring herself into other people's children, staying late to help kids who were struggling, buying school supplies out of her own paycheck for the ones whose families couldn't afford them, and that she sometimes wonders if she gave so much to other people's kids that she forgot how to hold on to her own. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just reached across the table and held her hand for a moment, and she let me, and neither of us mentioned it again. There's also a man named Walter, 3 tables over, who was a doctor for 40 years, delivered half the babies in his county at one point, according to him, and he says his daughter, the one he put through medical school herself, hasn't called in over a year. He keeps a photograph of her graduation in his shirt pocket, worn soft at the corners from being taken out and looked at so many times, and some evenings I see him just sitting with it in his hands, not even looking at it anymore, just holding it, like holding it is its own kind of conversation with her. I think about that photograph a lot. I think about how many of us in this building are carrying around some version of the same worn photograph, some proof that once, we mattered enormously to somebody, and that somewhere along the way, mattering became optional for them in a way it never became optional for us. I want to tell you something I've learned since coming here, something I didn't understand for most of my life. This building is full of people like me. Full of mothers who sewed prom dresses by hand at midnight so their daughters wouldn't feel poor at school. Full of fathers who worked 2 jobs so their sons could have one. Every single person eating dinner in that dining hall at 5 o'clock sharp has a version of my story, a child they gave everything to, who is somewhere out there right now, living a life that was built, brick by brick, out of their parents' sacrifices, and who has decided that the debt is paid, that love has an expiration date, that once you've given someone an education and a wedding and 30 years of your labor, you've fulfilled some invisible contract and you're free to close the account. I don't say this to make anyone feel sorry for me. I say it because I think somewhere out there, someone listening to this is a son or a daughter who hasn't made this choice yet, who still has the chance to pick up the phone, to make the drive, to sit at the kitchen table with a parent who is getting older and quieter and more afraid of being forgotten with every passing year. I want that person to know what I didn't know when I was young and busy and certain I had all the time in the world to pay my parents back in patience and presence. You don't have as much time as you think you do. None of us do. I still have Carol's sewing kit here in my little room. I keep it on the windowsill where the afternoon light hits it, and some days I open it just to smell the faint trace of her that's somehow still there after all these years, thread and fabric and something that was only ever her. I think about the 4th row at Michael's graduation, how loud we cheered, how certain we were that we had done something right. Maybe we had. Maybe love isn't about whether it gets returned. Maybe it's just about whether you gave it honestly while you had the chance. I gave mine honestly. I sold a house for it, twice over in different ways. I just didn't know that one day I'd be the one without a house, without a family close enough to notice, sitting by a window that isn't mine, waiting for a Sunday phone call that doesn't always come. If you're listening to this and you have a parent who's getting older, call them today. Not next week, not when things settle down, because things don't always settle down in time. Call them today, and tell them what they mean to you, while they can still hear it. And if this story moved you the way these stories move me every time I hear another one like it, stay with us, because there are more voices here who need to be heard, more parents with stories just like mine, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally listen.